Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. We are here for proving SOGIESC, so if that's not what you're expecting, now's your time to scoot out. We've got three amazing speakers today, and thank you all for coming to listen to what we've got to say. First, we're going to have Ruud Geerts and Louisa Bergsman from the Dutch Refugee Council. Very much looking forward to your presentation, and that will be on Is Your Love Life a Credible Story? Which we sort of heard a lot of themes about that this morning with all our speakers. Next, we'll be moving on to Annelie Newman's heteronormativity of the European border regime from the University of Göttingen. Is that correct? Say that right? Yeah, cool. And then followed by Diego Garcia Rodriguez, who is a Leverhulme Trust researcher from the University of Nottingham, who is looking at the UK asylum system and the intersection of religion, queerness, and the UK asylum process. So, are you two ready to go first? Just to say that we're going to have questions at the end, so please give your speakers their attention, and they're speaking for 15 minutes each, and there'll be plenty of time so we can ask lots of questions at the end. Okay? Online, if that's okay. Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Presentation.
Yes.
Because it's not projecting, I just asked for text.
Okay.
That one.
Is the screen?
Let's see if that's the same.
Okay. There it is. Nice. Yeah.
Welcome everyone to our paper presentation of Is Your Love Life Credible?, in which we focus on profoundness in the Dutch LGBT plus asylum procedure. So my name is Roos Geerts.
And my name is Louisa Bergsma, and we both work for the Refugee Council or Vluchtelingenwerk in the Netherlands as legal case managers for undocumented people in Amsterdam. And in our work, we help people to prepare for an asylum procedure because often they have been rejected once or multiple times. And many of our clients are LGBT people who have been rejected because they were not deemed credible. So one thing that we very often see is that they are not deemed credible because their statements are too vague, too brief, what we also heard this morning, of course, but also not profound enough. Their statements are not profound enough, which is niet diepgaand genoeg for Dutch speakers.
So one of the many cases we saw, which also has been an inspiration to start this research, is the case of one of our clients. Her name is B. She's a lesbian woman from Iraq and has been in the Netherlands for around 12 years. She's had around 4 asylum procedures and recently got rejected again. She's had a long-lasting relationship for 5+ years with a Dutch woman, and they've also had extensive preparation for the interviews. However, in the last procedure, their sexual orientation as well as their relationship was not credible, and because their statements were deemed too vague and superficial. Well, this made us wonder where the requirement for one's statements to be profound to be credible comes from. And next to that, we wondered if Dutch people would be able to declare profoundly measured by IND standards.
Our research questions are, we started with questioning what is the legal basis of having to make profound statements and how is this applied in Dutch asylum practice? So yeah, what does it mean? Then we conducted the interviews with Dutch people and we applied this legal framework of profoundness in a credibility assessment to these interviews. And in the end looked at, okay, is profound an indicator of credibility or what else is?
So, well, when we started the research, we looked in international EU and Dutch legislation, and we couldn't find a legal basis for profoundness in the credibility assessment. When we looked further, we found that it actually developed in Dutch asylum practice, which is Dutch case law, as well as the work instruction, which Louisa will tell a little bit more about in the next slide. Next to that, it's good to notice that factors of distortion play a role in the credibility assessment, and they can alter the capacity of someone and how they put their story forward. So you can think of cultural background, gender, age, and many other factors. However, on a Dutch level, we call it reference frame or referentiekader, and it actually shows on a Dutch level what is to be expected instead of on an EU level what you cannot expect of someone.
So the work instruction is an important document in Dutch asylum law where it gives guidelines for the decision maker and the interview person from the immigration service. It lays out the subjects that can be or should be discussed in the interview, and it gives the points of focus for the credibility. So it gives 4 themes that are discussed, but also it lays out there should be a focus on the thought process and somebody's feelings of feeling different, for example. And also it says there shouldn't be an internal struggle, but there is probably some kind of a process of discovering sexual orientation, and especially in a hostile environment. And profound is often a requirement for the thought process, and this process of discovering is what we found in case law, because this whole work instruction doesn't say anything about profoundness of statements.
So if we look at case law, we distilled some assumptions that were apparent. And so what is expected is if you're from a hostile environment, you should have had more of an extensive thought process. And if you declare that you have had a complicated thought process, it is expected that therefore your statements will be more profound. In all the case law that we saw, declarations regarding the process are always leading though. And next to that, the frame of reference is always important as well. So the cultural background, level of education, and one case stood by itself, which was someone's character.
So this is just one of the quotes from our interviews. And just, we're not gonna say so much about it, but just read it and think for yourself, would this be profound or not? So we interviewed a total of 8 people with a variety of sexual orientations. We focused on sexual orientation, which is why we speak of LGBT+ all the time, because we think gender identity should have a whole different approach. So in selecting the people, we focused on people born and raised in the Netherlands because of the frame of reference. So they were all coming from the same cultural background. 2 of them had a bicultural background. They were all educated, so they had some kind of education after high school. So we made a short profile of all the interviewees that we based our research on. And these are 2 examples, anonymized. So one of them is Gus. He is a bisexual cis man, and he became aware of his sexual orientation when he was around 17. He had a long struggle surrounding accepting for himself his sexual orientation, mainly because of a lot of microaggressions from his environment. So he didn't feel safe. And he did feel different. Whether he was profound, well, maybe.
Then on the right, we have Faye. She's a pansexual cis woman. She became aware about her sexual orientation when she was around 17 or 18. She's not quite sure. She describes her thought process as very minimal, and she relates this to her environment being open and accepting, and therefore she did not feel that different. Her statements regarding her sexual orientation and love life, were they profound? Maybe.
So this is a very simplistic overview of the outcomes of our interviews, where we focus on like the different topics, like thought process, did they feel safe, did they feel different, and self-identification. So green is yes, pink is no, and blue is a little bit or maybe. And what we can see is that everybody has a kind of thought process to a certain extent, except for the person who was straight. So this is a little bit affirming an assumption that people would have some kind of thought process. But they did all experience their environment very different, and their safety, although they are all coming from a relatively safe country, which is the Netherlands. So it already shows a little bit that everybody's experience was very different. But the question whether they were credible, it was really hard to answer actually, because, well, were they profound was one of the questions that we asked ourselves.
That you can see on the lowest row, so it's all blue, because as researchers we had many discussions and most of the time we did not agree if something was profound, and this is due to the fact that there is no framework for it. So as we saw it before, it's not clear what would be considered profound. Interesting, for example, was that when we asked the interviewees about, okay, how was your first experience? A lot of people described it as terms of good or nice or important. Next to that, although we didn't maybe find them profound.
Can I just ask a question? Is it okay?
Could you wait to the end? Is that okay?
Okay.
We're going to be taking questions.
Okay.
Thanks.
So although we didn't per se find them profound, we did find them credible. And it's good to notice that we also assumed that they were speaking the truth because they had no reason not to. But we also found other findings. As for example, the interviewees we had were very self-confident. So when we questioned them on their answers or on inconsistencies, they were very confident to say, no, this is not what I mean, this is how I experienced it, or even ask questions back. Next to that, although the answers might have been not very specific or a lot of personal examples, they did have a lot of experiences. So they could pull out a lot of examples of their love lives in the Netherlands, which made them more credible.
Yeah, the same also for freedom to express. Like, they are coming from a relatively safe country where they, it was very obvious that they have talked about this subject very often with their friends, or also many of them had extensive therapy. So even though their statements were not really profound, as in they were giving deep insight into their personal feelings, they could bring their experiences into words. Like they had words for it, learned from their life in a safe country.
Next to that, when we was transcribing the interview, we noticed that it was quite easy to make mistakes. As in, one researcher did the interview and one of us transcribed it, as well as that we taped the interview. And what we saw that even then, when we read back the interviews, that a lot of things people said were generalized. And let me see. Yeah, and that's interesting because in the Dutch asylum procedure, people, they can pull corrections forward, but they can't really refute anything except with their own words. So we saw that mistakes were very easily made, and therefore the words that people use to describe their experience were made more general.
So concluding, we didn't find a legal basis for profoundness in the LGBT or the LGBT asylum procedure. The interview showed that a lot of the assumptions apparent in asylum practice are not self-evidently true. And well, the question remains if credibility can ever be assessed in an unbiased way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And we have at least time. Okay. Yeah, no, especially at the end. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, short introduction. Thank you for having me here and for giving me the time to talk about the heteronormativity of the European border regime. Maybe just a short notice in advance. I tend to speak a bit fast, so if I'm getting too fast, maybe just a short hand raise so that I know. Be slowly. Thank you. So, yeah, during my presentation, I would like to highlight the role of the border and how the legal act of border crossing is influenced by power relations such as heteronormativity. With that, I want to point out the queer-specific hurdles with examining the conditions of the assessment of queer asylum cases and locate these within the discourse of border negotiation. So in my title, I'm using the term European border regime. And so I want to shortly start with a really short theorization on how to understand borders. We're talking about border regime instead of only borders. Scientists try to focus on the processes and practices along and around borders, instead of regarding only on the border per se as a territorial line. With that shift, it's getting possible to consider the complexity of borders and also the various actors which are part of the doing border processes or border constructions. This point of view, no, sorry, that's too fast. I was too fast, sorry for that. So this point of view is mainly grounded in the work of the French philosopher Etienne Balibar, who sees in borders a well-configuring function. And he characterizes them as polysemic, which means that the meaning of the border vary depending on the context. And yeah, with that position, he says that some borders, so it's a quote, some borders are no longer situated at the border at all in the geographical, political, administrative sense of the term. They are in fact elsewhere, wherever selective controls are to be found. And this theorization almost, yeah, kind of necessarily asks for a positioning of the asylum assessment as part of a border negotiation process. Yes, and oh, here's the slide. Oh, sorry for that. So, yeah, the thoughts of Etienne Balibar again. And this is what I want to do today. So with a few examples, I want to illustrate the doing border during the very first steps in the national asylum procedure at the example of Germany, where I'm currently doing my field research. And yeah, since queerness is regarded as a valid reason to seek asylum, as the European directive cited here says, the assessment shifted from proving one's sexuality or gender identity or expression to the credibility. So credibility is, as you all know, one of the key issues in queer asylum cases. And since we have so many great legal scholars and practitioners here, I want to leave the legal examination up to you. You are the experts for that. And I rather want to take a step back and yeah, put a more cultural anthropologist perspective to see what are the circumstances of people entering the very legal administrative field of the assessment of their credibility. And I want to ask if there are structural blind spots on power relations influencing the ability to act as a sovereign legal subject during these assessments, and thereby influence also the border crossing in the sense of being accepted after the assessment or not. So this is the point where I think where the border is becoming really tangibly permeable or not permeable. And with that questions in mind, I accompanied several queer people to their interviews and to the Federal Office of Migration and Refugees in Germany, so in different areas of Germany. And I conducted field notes before, during, and after the interview. And I could talk to the people meanwhile about their daily life and their living situation and everything around it. And since I used to work as a legal advisor for queer asylum cases over years, I could also function as a kind of a monitoring or control element during these interviews, and I could also intervene when necessary. So for today, I brought two main analytical focuses. On the one hand, the living situation as an influence, and on the other hand, the spatial and operational setting of the interview itself. Starting with the living situation. The majority of queer people I accompanied, they had to live in big camps and until their interview is done, and they get their transfer only after accomplishing these first hearings. These big camps obviously bear a huge risk of queer hostility, and these circumstances affect the daily life of the people. So one queer male I accompanied, he showed me his apartment after the interview. So the office, the institution, and the camp was one complex. And he told me about several homophobic remarks which he lives through regularly, and he don't want to accept this in his new life in Germany anymore. At the same time, he said that he was too afraid to complain about these assaults because he was afraid that he got to be transferred to probably also or possibly worse housing before the interview, and he wanted to concentrate on the interview. So here we can see that the conditions. So the conditions fulfill an area of conflict, where on the one side people try to focus and concentrate on their asylum procedure, and on the other side they try to hide themselves, even though this is a lifestyle of discretion, which many of them were already practicing in their country of origin. And so in several cases, this links to their causes of having to escape their country of origin in the first place, and also causes a kind of a re-traumatization. And the next example demonstrates this re-traumatizational effect very well. Here, a queer male, he cried a lot during his narration at the interview. He reports of anxiety, which also catches up with him again and again in the camp. He says that he thinks it's all connected to each other, and with that he means his experiences in the country of origin, and that they are still bothering him in the camp now. He goes on to describe the anxiety and the psychological situation. The interviewer then asks if he's already been to the med point, so this is the medical office in lots of camps, to get some calming pills. So apart from the obvious inadequate measures of the officers to just him to take some calming pills instead of processing the trauma or working on the re-traumatization conditions, this example illustrates well how the living situation in the camp regularly bring up traumatic experiences and cause mental stress, which also reveals itself during the interview. And this leads, in this case, it led to a mixing up of experiences from his country of origin with current experiences in the camp. And the narration got a bit confused because he was so overwhelmed by his emotions. And this example illustrates how the situation can cause re-traumatization and affect the ability to concentrate on the narration, which is asked to be chronologically detailed and comprehensible. The second condition, which is to be considered as an influence on the ability to act, is the setting of the interview itself. So one interview I accompanied, we both had to wait from 8 o'clock in the morning till 12 o'clock, and the time was really extremely tough, and everybody in the room looked tired. And another queer friend at our table, she was trying to sleep with her head on the table, so not really a comfortable and relaxing situation. And I myself, I remember the situation also as very exhausting. There was no Wi-Fi, there are no power sockets in the waiting area. There was one table with a bucket with a few Lego bricks, and this seemed to be the family-friendly area, I would say. And in this specific office, as you can see on the picture, the toilets weren't even inside the building. As you can see on the picture. And since everybody gets invited to be at the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, everybody might just be doomed to wait there for over hours and hours. So therefore, the waiting rooms are very restless. There are children playing. There are some people doing their language exercises. People are chatting in different mother tongues, watching videos loudly. So the several times I accompanied people, I realized that my mere presence in these waiting rooms is already making me tired. It's loud, it's stuffy. There are voices coming from everywhere. Seats are getting uncomfortable after sitting on them for hours. And also there are these nice posters in the waiting area informing about voluntary return, as you can see on the picture. And of course, this ain't a queer-specific problem, but nevertheless, I asked myself, especially after waiting for over 4 hours, how people now should manage to talk about their probably most traumatic experiences, and doing this also in this detailed, chronological, and comprehensible manner, if even I am not able to concentrate after this waiting period. Another aspect which really stuck with me was the oppressive presence of hierarchy, bureaucracy, and distance, which kind of literally jumped at me out of every corner in this building. So there was an escort by security guards, no matter where you had to go. There were arbitrary and multi-layered security measures. And one office, so the one with the toilet on the outside, the hierarchy even shows itself spatially. So there was a gallery more high than the waiting area, from which one people were called to the interview. And as one could see also on the picture there, the outside areas separated by a fence with officers on the one side and applicants on the other side. And apparently it's not even allowed to talk in specific areas of the building. And so this is what an interpreter told me when we had a short break during the interview, and the interview accompanied the applicant to the toilet. And then I wanted to start a small talk, and the interpreter immediately shut it down by saying it's not allowed to talk here. So the whole process is completely observed, controlled, and clocked through, but for sure only for the employees of the institution and not for the people seeking asylum. So the focus is not to empower the people to feel as comfortable as possible to do their best in the interview, but it's rather to keep the system as fast and, I would say, effective as possible. And apart from the discomfort, which I already said isn't a queer-specific problem, but this whole setting also bears a concrete queer hostile risk. So when I accompanied a trans woman to an interview, we had a short toilet break and we went back to the waiting area. And I entered the waiting area a bit after her. And she turned to me with a very serious look, as though she really rather seemed to look through me than at me. And her expression doesn't change. She just looked furiously into the room. And I asked if everything's okay or if anything bad happened. And she just confirmed. I tried to empower her with saying that she's not alone, but this didn't really go through to her. She just started to speak very loudly in her mother tongue into the room, and she shouted. And yeah, even though I didn't understand it, it felt like a complaint. And with that, she got really nervous. She started kneading her hands. She had tears in her eyes, and she was really upset. Yeah, and after the scream, we just stood silently next to each other and waited to go back to the interview again. And being back at the interview, she explained the situation, and there was an interpreter, so I also get what happened. And while telling the situation again, she also got very emotional and loud, and she almost screamed at the interview because she got so upset. And here we can see that even though there are these crazy escorts and this omnipresence of security and everything, that this doesn't necessarily guarantee safety for queers as a vulnerable group in these waiting areas. And I asked myself, if people are exposed to the risk of experiencing queer hostile assaults and attacks right before, or even in this case, during the interview, how this can affect their trust in the institution and in the employees of the institution to whom they have to reveal their entire life story. And of course, re-traumatization plays a huge role here as well. So summing up what I've presented so far, the housing situation bears a huge queer hostile risk. The examples have shown that this reinforces to maintain discretion logics, which means the lifestyle to hide the own queerness in order to avoid queer hostile persecution and all sorts. And with hiding, people try to play normal, or rather heteronormal, and they try to avoid breaks with the heteronormative structured society. So having to choose a discrete life can be clearly regarded as an expression of heteronormative regulation. And I would say there is a kind of a clash where people on the one hand have to pay attention the whole time and try to avoid to look anyhow queer during the living situation, while at the same time they have to totally expose and be as credible queer in front of the institution. Furthermore, living in a queer hostile environment leads to the constant re-traumatization, which reveals in the interview. Traumatic experiences from the country of origin merge with experiences from the camp, and this mental stress also might cause mixing up in the interview, where officers only want to hear about the experiences in the country of origin. So the situation may affect the ability to speak and to answer the questions as purposeful as they are supposed to do. The second aspect was the setting of the interview itself. Generally speaking, the Federal Office of Migration creates a so-called panoptic situation, which the French philosopher Michel Foucault uses as a setting of total control and as a concept and method of disciplinary, and part of the disciplinary method, sorry. And he says this distributes individuals on a scale, arrange them around a norm, and hierarchize them among themselves, and in the end disqualify them. So the whole organizational and spatial arrangement manifests the position of applicants in a power asymmetry, and it keeps them determined by norms instead of empowering the people to claim their human rights and do their best. And this fact, even while being in institutional rooms, people have to face queer phobia, leads to the conclusion that the institution is not able or willing to consider the special vulnerability of queer people in the asylum procedure, and therefore has to be regarded as a heteronormative structured setting as well. So, last slide. Transferring these findings from a participatory observation, we can say that the circumstances of the daily life and of the interview itself are strongly replemented by external determination, which hinders empowerment and keeps people in mental stress and discomfort instead of enabling them to speak. These conditions bear a high risk to maintain insecurity and discretion, which can be understood as an expression of heteronormative power structures. And since the decision on whether people are granted asylum or not is mainly based on the performance and the content of the interview, it is important to consider the terms and the conditions under which the asylum-seeking people have to enter to that very important stage. And as I said in the beginning, migration administration can be considered as one actor of bordering processes, and so is the interview. And with my findings, I would like to add the prerequisites and the migration managing reality as part of these bordering processes as well. So they play an important role in the border construction is permeable or not. And in my opinion, this should be systematically considered by all actors which are part of the asylum procedures, institutions in the first place, but maybe it's also an interesting insight for activists and NGOs. Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't know what I did. Did you put it on this last time? No, I sent you by your name. Is it that good? Oh, yeah. Yes. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Diego. I'm a researcher at the University of Nottingham. And today I will be presenting some findings from the project that I'm currently leading. This is part of a 3-year project funded by the Leverhulme Trust that is finishing in February 2026. And I started this in February last year. Because I'm not going to be exploring the methods, just to tell you a bit about how I came to these findings. This is based on interviews. I've done around 60 interviews with LGBTQ+ people seeking asylum, who also identify as religious in different ways. So I'm looking at the intersection between faith, spirituality, religion, and gender and sexuality in relation to asylum experiences. So interviews, I've also conducted a method called A Day in the Life, where I follow participants through a day in their lives, and also creative sessions, and I will show you one of the drawings from these sessions. So today I'm speaking about this notion of homosecularism. So I would like to start by defining what this means in this context. And I'm thinking about this as that normative expectation of very active secularism among LGBTQ plus people seeking asylum. What I argue here is that asylum systems often operate within these homosecular frameworks, which assumes a binary relationship between religion and LGBTIQ plus identities. So in this view, religion is primarily seen as a source of oppression for queer individuals, and applicants are expected to have distanced themselves from their faith to fully embrace their non-normative gender identity or sexual orientation. And what I argue also is that this framework simplifies the experiences of LGBTIQ plus people seeking asylum that are often very complex, and also impose those secular expectations that may not reflect their lived experiences. So here, I don't expect you to read all this text, it's a lot of text, but I just want you to focus on what I have highlighted in bold. This is actually from my PhD supervisor, also Claire's, Elena Firian Casmille. And I'm just highlighting these bits here to highlight how, from a post-colonial perspective, this analysis here highlights those neo-colonial dynamics at play, where the global North asylum processes impose Western-centric ideals of queer identity, reinforcing that hierarchy of acceptable queerness. So we see people seeking asylum and refugees as innocent victims, often of their own religion, of their own faith, of their own spirituality, gender outlaws that are non-conforming to religious and cultural norms. So we see that element of religion there. And this is what makes them worthy of protection in the liberal North. This raises the question of what happens to those who are actually still identifying as Christians or Muslims or whatever other religious identity they might be using. Are they still seen as victims? And I'm using quotation marks. Are they seen still as worthy of protection? So by framing them as victims of non-Western patriarchal and heteronormative religious frameworks, what we see is that this is perpetuating a binary view of liberation that aligns with secular or Western-centric norms. This homosexual expectation not only erases the complexity of intersectional identities, but also mirrors colonial attitudes by deeming non-Western forms of queerness and religious identities as incompatible, thereby delegitimizing diverse lived experiences. So I want to show you now an example of this based on a conversation I had with someone who identifies as gay. He's from Ghana, he's a Christian cisgender man, and he was speaking about his experience during one of the asylum interviews where the interviewer told him, "You're a gay man, I see here you're also a Christian, and you're going to the inclusive gathering." This is an inclusive church in Birmingham, in the UK. How is this possible? So he was explaining that his solicitor had before this interview sent some documents. There were also some supporting statements or letters from the inclusive gathering. And he said, "Yes, I was born in a Christian family. I grew up in a Christian house, and I've got these feelings, and my feelings are a personal thing. I cannot throw my personal feelings away unless I finish my life." So here we see that he's speaking from an individual perspective about his faith and spirituality. This is very different from religious exegesis or hermeneutics interpretations of the religious texts that might have been done in a patriarchal, normative, anti-LGBTIQ plus way. But these people doing the interviews and decision makers are often using this Western-centric secular approach that denies the possibility of embracing one's faith or spirituality, or even thinking about this as a source of support or a coping mechanism. So as a result, those who continue to practice their faith or belong to religious communities are often met with skepticism. The assumption is that if you are truly queer, you must have abandoned your religion. And this creates, of course, a barrier for those whose faith remains central to their identity, leading also to unfair assessments of their credibility. So here I want to show you a few more examples from my conversations with these individuals. And first here we see the case of a Kenyan bisexual Christian cisgender man who said that in his interview, the interviewer asked him one question that was what he considered to be alarming. they asked him they said, if you are a Christian, how is it that you are bisexual? And he said that was a bit alarming for me because who's to say I cannot be, who's to say that? Second, we have the case here of a Bangladeshi gay Muslim cisgender man who speaks about feeling uncomfortable about the questions he was asked about Islam, about his religion. He said that he felt uncomfortable and shy, but still tried to explain it. And they said during the interview, you're a Muslim, how do you judge homosexuality from the perspective of your religion? So there's also this expectation of having to explain why Islam should be welcoming. These are no religious experts. These are people with lived experiences of, growing up in a Muslim society, Muslim majority society, Muslim family, going to the mosque, doing religious activities, going to doing their prayers maybe individually. So there's that expectation that they have this actual knowledge of Islamic theology to explain that there are actually interpretations that are inclusive of queer people. And the consequences of this for people speaking with someone from a charity based in the UK is that many gay Muslims are pretending to not be religious because they are scared that they are going to be questioned. This is going to have a negative impact on the assessment of their claims. So we see that practical implication of this. And what shocked me when I started doing this research is that in 2018, so this is 6 years ago, Rainbow Migration in the UK published a report where they mentioned the existence of asylum refusal letters explicitly referencing applicants' religious affiliations. For example, a claimant was told that they had not provided a reasonable explanation as to why they continued to practice Islam, knowing full well that homosexuality is not permitted in their religion. And this continues to happen based on the experience of the people I'm talking to 6 years later, and also going against the own guidelines from the Home Office. So we have this context. I want to show you an example of the outcomes of the creative sessions that I'm doing, where here we see a drawing made by an Eritrean gay Christian cisgender man, where he is trying to draw his asylum journey. We see him very small in the bottom left corner, and the asylum journey that he describes is basically this path in the middle. And then the blue, the different colors represent different moments in his journey. So in the blue represents crossing the sea. He went from Libya on a boat to Italy, and then from France, he crossed to the UK. The black that represents his anxiety, fears, struggles. And then we see some instances in the yellow of the impact of faith, the support that he got from his spirituality. And then this remains here, but all of this basically disappears. And this is his expectation that things are going to get better at some point. He's still waiting for his final interview, so he doesn't know what is going to happen. But I thought it would be interesting to show you this, also because if we look at that path, there are so many things happening. We see all the black, the anxiety, the fear. And it made me think of this notion of cruel optimism. This is a concept used by Lauren Berland to speak about how those things that are supposed to help us achieve something at some point that is going to be positive to us are actually the obstacles that are in the way of us thriving. So in this case, we see that this person is living in accommodation where he's having lots of problems because of being gay, having to hide his identity, struggling because he doesn't really have much financial support, and expected by the Home Office to live an authentic queer life where he's hanging out with the gays in a bar or whatever. Struggling with his mental health, and all this, you're expected to go through all this to finally get a positive response if you are lucky to get refugee status. So what are the consequences of this for credibility assessments? So for those who do not conform to the expected secular narrative, their credibility may be questioned or their claims may be outright rejected. And the failure to understand the intersection of faith and queerness often leads to unjust outcomes for people seeking asylum who are unable to present their experiences within these rigid frameworks. So now, before I finish, I just want to show you the impact that religion, faith, and spirituality has in the lives of those that are seeking asylum in the UK context. And this happens also while they, as I mentioned, they have very little support in terms of their mental health needs, in terms of their financial needs. So this is actually filling gaps that are not being filled by the government. So here I want to show you first that importance and that role of what I call divine guidance. So for example, someone who already got his refugee status told me that it was not easy to go through the process, but he felt that because he trusted God and he believed in God, he put God first to ask him to have mercy on him. So he assumed that this had an impact on getting his refugee status. And then someone who increased the frequency of prayers, praying every day to ask God for guidance. Also, we see the role of religious organizations. So, for example, Christian groups who pray for people seeking asylum, but also those that do not offer just spiritual guidance, but also tangible support. So, for example, food, they pay for their bus tickets to be able to attend events, to go to Pride events. They also put them in touch with solicitors. They offer legal support. And also they put them in touch with counselors and therapists. So we see that they are playing a vital role there. And also the impact of this on mental health and resilience. We see the case of someone who actually had suicidal thoughts, and he spoke about how it was because of his religion that he stopped, that was what stopped him from killing himself. And then also sometimes reflecting on how religion has helped him navigate the times when he knew he was depressed. So yes, an example here of what these groups are doing. This is from the Pride in York in the north of England, where this group LGBT Catholics at York had a stall and they were sharing information. And there were a few LGBT people seeking asylum present there who also work as volunteers. So this is just for us to think about how religious communities do not always have to be represented as oppressive, but they can also serve as crucial support networks, and how progressive or underground faith groups also can provide safety and advocacy for LGBTQ+ individuals seeking asylum. And these groups also could engage more actively also in conversations about asylum, providing expert testimony, offering pastoral care, to also help people better understand the intersection of faith, queerness, and asylum. So to finish, just a few key issues to highlight here. First, how the current asylum processes in the UK and in many other contexts are shaped by homosecular frameworks, which prioritize these secular Western-centric views of queerness, and individuals who hold religious beliefs as a result of that often find themselves marginalized and forced to downplay their faith to fit in an expected queer identity. And this not only complicates their asylum claims, but also reflects deeper neo-colonial attitudes, as I mentioned before. Religion is often framed as incompatible with queerness, position secularism as the norm. So what can we do to address this? We heard before during the opening speeches the need for training. So training should be actually provided to asylum officials to understand that intersection between gender, sexuality, and religion. Taking an intersectional approach is also crucial to recognize the diversity of LGBTQ+ identities, subjectivities, subject positions, and move beyond a one-size-fits-all model of Western identities. And we also must encourage collaboration with faith-based organizations to better support claimants. And of course, we need to shift credibility assessments to focus on claimants' autonomy and trust their experiences rather than undermine them. So by doing so, we can create, hopefully, a more inclusive asylum system that respects the experiences of people that might describe themselves in a different way to how many of us in the West might identify or describe ourselves as. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening. And any questions, I'm happy to listen.
Thank you to all our wonderful speakers. We now have an opportunity for questions for everybody. I need to ask that you speak into the microphone because we have some online guests as well. So just so that they can hear the questions that are being asked in the room, we just need you to speak into a microphone. Who would have a question? Okay. If you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Neil Greengrass, a private practitioner from the United States. I found the discussion of the Dutch profoundness standard intriguing. I haven't heard of it. And I was wondering what your take is. Are we talking about display of emotionality by the asylum seeker, or level of detail of the narrative? Are we talking about complexity of the narrative? Where does this lie? That's one question. The other is there being taken into consideration the research that shows that in terms of emotional intelligence, generally, right, and the research hasn't been very, hasn't had many hues. It's divided into males and females, but basically it's found that pretty consistently women are more connected to their emotions and better able to express their emotions than men.
So for the first question, you mean what profoundness actually means, right? Or what they mean by it. So yeah, that's really something that we were trying to find as well. And I think the most clear answer came from case law, where it was described as giving deep insight into a thought process or into personal feelings. So it goes a little bit beyond, or it goes far beyond just giving facts and details. You really have to describe your feelings in a profound manner. But since there is no real basis for the use of this word, it is very unclear what is actually meant by it. So it's used by the immigration service in their decisions, and the court is using then, like, going into it as well in their court decisions. Yeah, but it remains very unclear when something is profound enough, and that actually is the problem. And then, well, for the second, you want to? And then we didn't really take into account, or into our research, other researches about the emotional intelligence between men and women. But maybe what was interesting in our research, we didn't find that the women were more connected to or were more emotional intelligent than the men. It was very different per person. But do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? We've got about 5 more minutes. So.
Hi, my name is Noah Moala from Nürnberg Road. I'm based in Germany. And I have a question for the first one and one for the second one. The first one, like, is more of a curious question about the lesbian Iraqi woman. You said that she stayed in the Netherlands for 12 years, but she wasn't granted asylum. On what legal basis can you stay here for 12 years without, like what the legal basis, like, and how can you apply for asylum multiple times? Like, because these are more curious questions about this case, because it just sparked my curiosity because I'm from the Middle East. So, and for the second one, where did your research take place, in which federal state? And would you say this is a German-wide conditions, or like there's federal states where the conditions for like interviews process and the camps and like the queer immigration are better? And would you say that Germany maybe needs federal policy and not allow personal states to make their own policies on these issues? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. So I conducted I accompanied people in different federal states, so also in the eastern and in the western part of Germany. And I couldn't really make it different if, so it's depending on really the people interviewing. And I had really interviews which were really nice, and the interview was very sensitive, and we couldn't stop so we couldn't manage to finish the interview in time. So then we sat together and we made an appointment together with the same interpreter and see when can we do the next appointment. So this is a very good practice example. So yeah, critical term. So it's always very individually, and I would definitely say that there needs to be a structure for that. That it's not so, and it's also one short remark, not a guarantee to have the well-trained interviewer. So there are these well-trained ones which are agenda sensitive, and sometimes it's better to not apply for the gender sensitive because then you know who's going to do the interview, and sometimes then you already know that it's bad. So there's really no rule, unfortunately, and I think this is a real bad. Thank you.
She was rejected asylum multiple times, and also without legal status. So you could stay in the Netherlands, not officially, but and once, if you're rejected asylum, and depends on the situation, but if you have new facts and circumstances or new proof, or maybe the immigration office made a wrong decision before, then you can apply again for asylum. So therefore she had multiple procedures, mainly on the basis of her sexual orientation. And the rejection was, laid in her statements not being credible because they were too vague and too superficial. And the same was her girlfriend wrote a letter as well, and was also heard by the IND, and it was the same.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karim Saleh. I have some comments, like notes, once I came here, I have it. What's the criteria of to judge about the people, is gay or not? Because when you say okay, this person is gay, this person not gay, and that's I need gay nuch or chinuch. So as I know, what's the criteria of the IND can choose the people that he is gay or not? Because we believe that, okay, I'm a gay, but from other side says you are not gay. So there is a debating always in the IND and the lawyer that they have to convince the person is gay or not. So I want to know what's the criteria the IND is thinking about it. Yeah.
It's a very good question.
That's wrong. Well, IND, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I feel like this whole day is about this.
Yeah.
But what are the criteria? Your question is, what are the criteria for when you are credible?
They judge the people they are gay or not.
Yeah, so based on the work instruction, you should be able to tell about kind of your process of realization. They're not allowed to call it that anymore, but that's what they do. You have to give insight into your process of realization. When did you find out about being gay? How did you feel about it? What kind of relationships did you have? So about your personal experiences. And then they decide if that's credible or not.
Yeah. Do you think they are right for the most of time, or they don't judge rightly? They say, okay, this is not gay, but the other side is gay. Like when you say something and you will not believe it, the lawyer has to convince that, and after the rejection, it will get approved.
Could you repeat the question in the microphone?
Oh yeah, you have to speak in the. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Once the IND thinking about it, but they are not believe it, and the lawyer convince again, and after the objection, he get approved. And finally, I heard that many times from the people, he got objection, but after that he appealed again and he got approved.
Okay.
It's we fighting, we do something is not normally, why the IND do like that? Because we just fighting with them, or what's right we have to take.
Yeah. Is it for us? Or somebody else? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The first criteria
Yeah.
I think the first criterion of IND is no, you do not get accepted unless that's the very harsh one, and it still is, I think. There's no reason.
Sorry, can I take, there's a question at the back.
On the criteria, I just want to advertise my presentation. That's what I'm going to be discussing about, criteria of the IND. But the question on the profundity, I think I found your last answer more satisfying, because what I found is change of vocabulary. So when a certain vocabulary get heavily criticized and lobbied by different groups and individuals, then they change vocabulary. So before it was shame and acceptance, then it became awareness and acceptance. Now it became profundity. So it's does it really like, because they are saying the same thing, but they are just changing, keep changing, because whenever the words are criticized.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and I can make a small note on that, because in our research first we actually thought that we found that profoundness had replaced the process of realization, but profoundness was already used in this time before that. So maybe it is used more now, but it hasn't exactly replaced it. But I do think what you're saying, I agree.
Okay, well, on a final question, is there anybody that's asked a question that hasn't asked a question that
One question, but
it's the final question.
Yes, I'm Laura, here in Amsterdam, for asylum seekers mostly, and I've got a question for Annelie. Yes, hello Annelie. You described about the situation in which the asylum seeker was not feeling comfortable telling about his asylum story, what we call it in Holland, due to all kinds of circumstances in waiting areas, inside the interviewing room, etc. Could you describe what would be the best situation in which somebody should be interviewed? Do you not have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think in general the interview itself is a very critical, or should be regarded critically as a mechanism to create the ground on deciding on people's asylum case. But if we want to stick to that method, I would say there are some examples that people get really appointments, not just come on one spot at the day and then have to wait. That they maybe also that it's more publicly advertised that they can have accompaniment, for example, and that maybe also support networks have try to focus on accompanying really those people, because sometimes we all know resources are strictly regulated and so on, but these are really so crucial elements, and especially with those waiting areas when people from an NGO wants to accompany and has to spend the whole day sitting in that interview. This is for voluntary resources. This is so harsh, and if there are these small changes, just getting interviewers in every other office as well, this would already make such a huge difference, I would say. And of course, we can talk about how interpreters and so on, but maybe we can teach it and we can also then move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions. We need to make our way back for the next plenary. Thank you all for your engagement and any questions, and I look forward to seeing you on the next day.